a sign that we're already online. So we will some people are coming up, but we will start. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to our paper launch, 6 ways to better involve national parliaments in the EU affairs. And now in these days, these months, we notice that more and more European integration and European Union tasks are increased, also maybe because of vision, but more on concrete tasks, concrete challenge the EU is facing. In relation to that, what we have is the old discussion coming back on how to get everything to work better as the EU institution, the multi-speed Europe, the cooperation with certain EU member states, but also related to that, the whole question of EU's legitimacy. On the other hand, we have a situation where EU is having more power, not cumulating. I would not say it's cumulating because actually it's the member states themselves who are A, critical, but B, they want the EU to do more. Now, many of us here, we are from Brussels bubble. I think we know very well the institutions, Commission, Council, all of that. But maybe a little bit less, at least apart from my own country, is how the EU member states and how they manage, especially the parliaments, their relations to the head of states and the ministers when they come to Brussels. We always know the summits, the EU summits, the prime minister comes, you have 48 non-stop meeting discussions. But the important part of that dynamics in each country is how the parliament is following up the head of state coming to these negotiations. Of course, it's very challenging because, as we know, in the morning of the meeting, the situation is very different than 12 o'clock in the night. So the challenge for the national political dynamics is to see how it follows up, and for that we had this study, this research, and I think we hope that it gives a better impression on how different countries are playing that. And we have a more in-depth presentation of the paper, but we see that many countries are approaching this involvement and our follow-up of the delegation very, very differently. Sometimes they are institutionally integrated in the committee work, in the parliament, a little bit more closed discussions like in Finland. Then you have much more open discussion, like in Sweden, or in some cases, the whole discussion takes place in the parliament. Different versions. I guess the challenge and one of the what we are going to discuss today is these different formats, how it's done, and actually what we are going to do later also send this research paper to all the EU member state national parliament, because I think there's many ideas. But of course, in the long run, then there comes the question not only how to improve that interaction between the national parliaments and the follow-up with the delegation, but then what is the impact here? Because what we are seeing, and as the research paper indicates, the parliament themselves start to have presentation or stronger presentation and a presence here in Brussels. So what are the implications when you have the EU, the leaders of the head of states communicating the national position, but at the same time, Parliament having also its independent dialogue. And of course, the ultimate question is there's a danger that when these systems develop, that we become a kind of success of our own, we become victims of our own success, meaning that we have already European Parliament, which is elected, which should present the view and will of the people, and also present the common European vision and view on these issues, because of course national parliaments logically have the tendency to push their national agenda. So is there a risk how to mitigate that dialogue and how to come to optimal result? So with this, I welcome your online viewers, new audience here, and I will give the floor, thank for the panelists and the speakers, which are represented by Federico Rejo, who is our strategy coordinator and senior research officer, and who will also, yes, give the spin for discussion, moderate our debate today, and of course moderate or introduces the speakers. So very much thank you for coming, online viewers. We already see that there are many, and Federico, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tommy. Thank you all for being here. Well, you have already laid the scene, so what remains maybe for me is to tell you how this came about. Why did we do this paper? And the origin of this was an exercise of reviewing and strategic reflections on the state of democracy in Europe that we did a couple of years ago on the impulse, actually, of Klaus Welle, who is sitting here with us, and which then became a strategic document called the 7 Ds for Sustainability. And one of these Ds was democracy. And what we realized there was that, as Tommy said, over the last 15, 20 years, we saw a very significant increase in the salience of EU policymaking in national democratic debates. EU policymaking is much more important in national discussions and in national policies across policy areas, from immigration to environment to finance and so on. But debates on how to improve the quality of democracy in Europe have mostly focused on the EU level. We have had furious debates also because of the rise in populism on how to further democratize the European Union, the EU institutions. One of the key achievements of that debate was, for example, the Spitzenkandidaten process at the European level. So the idea that we should link the results of the European election and the agenda of the Commission more closely. But there was a blind spot, which is we did not pay as much attention to the national level. And if we accept the notion that the EU is if we take subsidiarity seriously, actually, and therefore we consider the EU a multi-level democratic system, the legitimacy of the national level and the ability of national parliaments to legitimize EU policies is as important as the legitimacy of the European institutions themselves. So that was the reason why. I mean, for a number of reasons, some of which also Tommy mentioned. First of all, we know, I will mention one or two, but I think that then the speakers will go more into details. We know that there is, at times in some policy areas, a process of empowering executives, national executives, over national parliaments that derives from European integration. So the ability of national parliaments to hold their executives accountable becomes very important. We have seen also a spectacular rise of the European Council during the last 15, 20 years as the supreme political authority of the Union. And as you know, there is no other way to hold the European Council accountable at the moment other than their heads of states and government, in their national parliaments. There is no EU mechanism to do that. There might be in the future, for example, if we directly elect the president of the European Council, but that's not the case at the moment. And so more and more, we had the impression that, to use the expression of the paper, we are in a Euro-national parliamentary system. I very much like that. And we need to think about legitimacy and democracy in those terms. So to do that and to present the paper, we resorted to some of the best experts, academic experts, I think, around in Europe on the topic. You are all somehow affiliated with the Center of Parliamentary Studies of LUISS University. So there is Nicola Lupo, who is a professor of constitutional and public law at LUISS University, sitting directly on my right. There is Cristina Fasone, who is assistant professor of comparative public law, also at LUISS. And there is Olivier Rosensberg, who is affiliated with the center, but I think you mainly teach in French at the École Polytechnique and the University of Luxembourg. And so my suggestion would be that first we give the floor to the three speakers in turn to present different aspects of the paper. And then we have Klaus Welle, who doesn't really need much of a presentation here, I think, former Secretary General of the European Parliament, former Secretary General of the EPP, and many other things. He will give his opinion as a discussant, and then we can have a debate also with you also. I encourage you to start thinking when you hear the presentations about your own comments and questions. So without further ado, I suggest that I pass the floor then to Nicola for a general framing of the of the papers. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Federico, and many thanks to the Martens Center for involving us in this research paper. It was a pleasure for me as a director of this small Center for Parliamentary Studies based at LUISS, presided by Professor Andrea Manzella, still very active and on the point. And the product is in front of you, and I'm very pleased to see that there has been so much interest on what we did. The title indeed is a quote by a song by Paul Simon, you might have noticed. It was indeed 50 ways to leave your lover. In this case, it's 6 ways to better involve national parliaments in your affairs. The idea is that the aims are widely shared to strengthen EU democracy through national parliaments, through strengthening national parliaments. That's something that was not so 20 or 30 years ago. But for the reasons that have already been recalled, I think that I will not stress this, but it's really because it's something that we fully share. So the point of departure, the aims we want to get are to strengthen EU democracy working at national level. We had already strengthened very much the European Parliament, and I think Klaus Welle is the one who made this, among the ones who made this possible. So we exploited the strength and the possibilities of the European Parliament, but it was not enough. And even the Spitzenkandidaten example you quoted a minute ago, the experience has some, let's say, black and whites, given the fact that the national side of EU democracy need to be taken into account. So this is, if you want, the starting point. The research does not want to be a comprehensive comparative study. There are some, and for instance, Olivier has co-edited the Palgrave Handbook of National Parliaments and the European Union that was published 11 years ago. So if you want to have a reference book, that's the book. Is a bit needs to be updated, but there are some further research that have been conducted. While it has mainly 2 aims, I would say. The first one is to show how different are the experience of national parliaments regarding EU affairs, that depend a lot on political and cultural traditions. National parliaments, I see that from the Brussels bubble, as it was quoted, might look alike. They are not. And we need to go in depth and to try to understand and to single out the features and the peculiarities of each of them. And I think this is the first point. The second one, which is most difficult, let's say, the most difficult one, is to pinpoint some best practice developed by them, which we think can be relevant also for other national parliaments. And here we did a very drastic selections. It was agreed by the center. Just let's select 6 practices, no more than this. And so it's an easy game to find some missing practices and case studies, and I'm very happy if they arise, because there is a lot of, there are plenty also, because these procedures constantly change in rules and in practice, also depending on national political equilibria. The kind of majority in parliament matters with the opposition, how they are placed on EU level. And we also tried to identify 4 roles of national parliaments, and that's the last thing I'm going to say, just to stay within the 5 minutes of my part of the presentation, the general part. That the first one is national parliaments as legislators, or if you want better, maybe as co-legislators. They are part of the legislative activity, and here is where early warning system is placed. Indeed, we don't deal much with the early warning system, so the check on subsidiarity principle, because we think it has been a bit overestimated at the beginning, and now it has become a kind of commonplace to say, okay, the early warning system didn't work well, so national parliaments are not active in EU studies, which is a mistake in our view. So we try to answer and to counter-argument that it's not exactly how things should be analyzed. The second role is the one of being overseers of their respective governments, and we think that this is the most important role since the beginning, indeed. Do not forget that the 6 founding member states of European communities had all 6 parliamentary forms of government by then. So a confidence relationship with one of the 2 houses and the government. So the architecture of the EU. And that's why, if you want, the Euro-national parliamentary system, so including this relationship into the picture, this confidence relationship, national level, into the overall picture. Then the third role is the one of being national political institutions, so expressing the viewpoints of each of the member states. And here there is also the advantage of including the oppositions, the national oppositions, which are normally excluded from the EU decision-making process. And we know that when this opposition become majority, they question, of course, the legitimacy of the whole process if they have not been involved, and they like not to be involved sometimes. They prefer not to be part of the process, to be free to criticize the whole process. And this was very true also in the parliamentary cooperation, which is the last and fourth function, the one in which all parliaments or national parliaments together are a kind of representative institution, a kind of transnational parliamentarism. We are not stressing this point, but this is one point that should be taken into account. Of course, and that's really the last sentence I'm saying, parliaments are political bodies. They are not administrations. So these 4 functions overlap continuously. It's very difficult to identify one function to distinct, but this happens in any parliament, in any parliamentary procedure, and this is part of how parliament as a political bodies work. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you very much, Nicola, for very succinctly but effectively presenting the framework, the general framework of the paper. I suggest that now we move more to the specific findings, and so I give the floor to Cristina to present them.
Thanks very much, Federico. Thanks to the organizer, to the Martin Center for this opportunity. I will provide just some flashes on the findings of this paper, looking at the scrutiny of EU legislative proposal, oversight of governmental and intergovernmental institutions, in particular the European Council, the key issue of access to information, and last but not least, interparliamentary cooperation. Here, in the case of the scrutiny of EU legislative proposals, so somehow connected to the legislative role, even though they are not certainly legislator in the supranational level of national parliaments, we could zoom on the experience of the Finnish parliament and the Grand Committee, and the way, also as a consequence of the adoption of a new constitution in 1999 in this country following the accession to the European Union, how strong also the constitutional recognition of this institution is, and on the function of scrutinizing EU affairs. It has become a benchmark also in other legal systems that have joined the European Union later on. And we could see that the mixed composition of this committee, the capacity of intervening very early in the stage of the EU lawmaking process, but also the capacity of coordinating the scrutiny of EU affairs, because also the other committees, of course, intervene, but there is this coordinating role of the Grand Committee, also due to the fact that members of the other committees are also, some of them, are members of the Grand Committee. So this allows also for horizontal, probably coordination amongst the committees is quite important. And from this perspective, we could see that is the case of Finland, but also in other member states, the scrutiny activity on EU legislative proposal is predominantly committee-based. And where committees are stronger, this kind of activity tends to be also more far-reaching and providing clear indications as to how the EU legislative process should be moved forward. In this respect, it's also important that the government provide indications, and also in terms of selection of what are the key priorities for that member state to be advanced at European Union level. But I think that there are two components here that we need to bear in mind. The strong normative framework on which the capacity of the Parliament to scrutinize EU affairs is built, together with a more informal dimension of party politics and coordination or consensual dynamics versus more majoritarian dynamics, the consensual dynamics being in the case of Finland very much present. So you could see that it's precisely in committees that the consensus is shaped around a specific legislative proposal, and is not an isolated case. Also in this respect, and I move to the second point, that is transparency and access to information, we could appreciate that transparency at any cost is not necessarily a value when scrutinizing EU affairs, in the sense that a certain level of secrecy, of lack of transparency, is instrumental for the parties and the members to negotiate. Then, of course, it's needed for the sake of accountability to provide justification of why a certain decision has been taken. But there is a level, especially in committee, of lack of transparency that can be instrumental to build consensus. And in terms of access to information, we focus on the Swedish case, which is particularly interesting because of the Freedom of the Press Act that basically gives to national parliamentarians the same information rights as ordinary citizens in terms of access to official documents. And in that particular experience, there was a good balance between accessibility, but also need when information are classified for reason of security, national interest, that this level of transparency is somehow downgraded, and maybe just MPs from specific committees can access to the information, but those are not made public immediately to everyone. And in that respect, the executive also provides clear guidance on what are the most salient information that on which the Parliament should focus for the sake of scrutinizing EU affairs, because national parliaments are overloaded of information, so the selection is not easy, and the government can provide indications in that respect. For what concerns the scrutiny of the European Council, we focus specifically on the Italian and the Spanish case, quite different in the sense that Italy came quite late in understanding the Italian Parliament the importance of scrutinizing the European Council activities ex ante and ex post, whereas Spain was quicker in adapting also its normative framework to that. But in both cases, we will see that there is a committee stage that is instrumental to understand what has been decided, what position was taken by the national government inside the European Council. And in Italy, we have developed a practice, especially after 2011, so after the financial crisis, to also involve the plenary. And to invite the Prime Minister to explain publicly what has happened. But it's quite important also to have ex ante indication by the European Affairs committees on where they see the government should go in the context of the European Council. Last but not least, interparliamentary cooperation. Here we could explore several dimensions. One, which is quite important, a bit underestimated, is the role that national parliamentary administrators, the staff, the national parliamentary official plays, not only in their national chambers, but also at European Union level, with the activity of the national parliament's representatives in Brussels, hosted by the European Parliament, and it's very important on various grounds, in my view, for the sake of coordination, maybe amongst national parliaments and with the European Parliament, which is a key actor, but also to brief and debrief their own national parliament of what is going on in Brussels. And here the experience of the German Bundestag is paradigmatic, because also of the staff at disposal and the level of information. And we could also explore another dimension, that is the collaboration between national parliamentarians and the members of the European Parliament of that member states in different ways. This coordination can happen on a political partisan level, as we could see in the case of Denmark, but also in a more structural level, so involving and recognizing the role of members of the European Parliament inside the national parliament, participating in the committee meetings, so not voting, of course, but intervening, and also obtaining information from the national parliament. And we could see in the case of Hungary post 2024 European elections that this was also an interesting case of channeling the opposition view from Brussels into the domestic parliament, especially when the leader of the TISA party was elected as a member of the European Parliament. The structural permanent instances of cooperation have blossomed as a consequence of the Treaty of Lisbon and the various crises. We decided to focus on the Europol and the Joint Parliamentary Scrutiny Group on Europol because of the clear mandate that is provided in EU legislation, and also the narrow focus that this instance has compared to other interparliamentary conferences at large, and finally also on the smaller size of this venue and the powers that it was granted in terms of scrutiny on the management board of the Europol, asking questions. So this has been viewed from us as a particular interesting experience of development of structured interparliamentary cooperation. And I will stop here. Thanks.
Thank you very much. You did not have an easy task, I have to say, to present the bulk of the paper in 5-7 minutes, but you fulfilled this admirably. So thank you very much. And this is, of course, just give you a foretaste of the rich palette of examples that you find in the paper. And indeed, for us as editors, at least for me, I don't know about Klaus, but one of the surprising findings is that it's not only the usual suspects that we always quote as successful examples. Sweden, Finland, Italy, Spain, Hungary, feature as parliaments that have experimented with interesting innovations that can be considered best practices. Now, I think you might have you are the only political scientist on the panel, aren't you? So the recommendation, the lawyers left the recommendations to the political scientist. And so, tell us a bit in terms of recommendations, what can we extract from the paper? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. We wanted to have recommendations because, this has a purpose, and at the end, the purpose is to, if possible, help for the improvement of parliamentary democracy in Europe and of the EU at the end. So we considered recommendation. Of course, institutional transfers have a very disappointing story, because when you put a practice of a member state within another member state, sometimes it does not work, or often it does not work. But still, we think that regarding parliaments, there is a common tradition, a common culture of parliamentary democracy, despite obvious evidences that with some adaptations, with some cautious, make that at the end of the day, institutional transfers should be possible. So this leads us to have 9 recommendations at the end that derives from what Christina just told you. So I'll be brief. The first one, this is for our colleagues specialized in national parliaments. We should not make a difference between parliaments' focus on scrutinizing documents and or giving instructions to governments. This is central to the literature, saying there are 2 types of national parliaments in EU affair, the document-based system and the mandate-based system. We say it does not make sense, really, because you need both. You need to do both. You need to instruct. In order to instruct the government, you need to analyze deeply the documents from the EU. So there should be a comprehensive role in that sense of national parliaments, looking at documents and giving their views about them to their government. Second and more concrete recommendation, there are some advantages to have a dual membership for parliamentarians, national parliamentarians, of course, between the European Committee, the Committee for European Affairs, and other standing committees or the other standing committee to which they belong, so that they can beneficiate to one from each other. So at the end of the day, it's better to have this system of dual membership. Third recommendation, it's also better to have at least some top politicians, high flyer politicians within the European Affairs committees. Maybe not all of them, because we need also some who can spend more time during their week to investigate files, etc. But to have party leaders, party group leaders, committee chairs who meet frequently, sometimes weekly, as in Finland, give a lot more political weight to the European Affairs committees, if they come and if they work, of course. We just need to have not just their names, but also their actual commitment. Fourth recommendations. Well, it's very important to have the national class, the civil servant from national parliament active in Brussels, permanently sent in Brussels, working both with the European Parliament and with their national representation. And well, this is something which is done, but which should continue to be done. Recommendation number 5, national parliaments should force their government to give their views in advance on either legislation, EU legislation in project, or major topics at the European agenda. And of course, national governments never want to give their view in advance, because they are divided, because it's a loss of time for them, because they think that it will be detrimental to their negotiation strategies. But as we see with the Swedish case, or before with the UK, when UK was member of the EU, it's possible to have accommodations and to accommodate ways to give official views in advance with some limited secrecy for a while, etc. Recommendation number 6, it's also important to force the opposition to give its opinion in advance, as the government does. We think it's important from a democratic standpoint to force the opposition only to be in a position where they criticize a proposal, etc., or they criticize the European policy of the government, and to force it to take stance, to take position through possibly an official document they have to draft, through the minutes of the European Affairs committees, but to give their view. 7th recommendation, the systematic monitoring of the European councils, as is done in many countries, but to do it systematically, so including informal European Council of all kinds, which necessitates for national parliaments to keep an organizational flexibility, which is something they can do, but they have to be prepared to that. If suddenly there is a European Council because of an event, we need ex post and ex ante 1 week after, 2 days after, 2 days before meetings in the committee or in the plenary, depending on the states. Eighth recommendation, systematic invitation of the member of the European Parliament to the work of the European Affairs Committees from their national parliaments. And by there I mean from the national delegation to which they belong to from the member states from which they were elected. They should be invited. We should all be invited with a full equality between MEPs, whatever their party is. And possibly, as in Hungary, it's also possible to give them a right to speak during committee meetings, possibly maybe during plenary, not to vote, because they are not a member of national parliaments, but to participate actively, not just to be invited. Nine and last recommendation, we think interparliamentary cooperation is important, of course. There is a very deceptive history regarding interparliamentary cooperation. It's been 30 years that institutions are seeking to do it. And what we see with the example developed in the report is that in order for it to work, it's important that it is focused on a given issue, on a given policy field, not in order to speak very generally, very broadly about EU and best practices, as it's too often done within COSAC. Thank you a lot for your attention.
Thank you, Olivier. So I think that now, after the 3 presentations, we have a good basis of knowledge on the contents of the paper. We can start to discuss them. And to discuss them, I give the floor to Klaus. I mean, I think many aspects of EU democracy would be different without Klaus. The European Parliament would arguably be a much weaker institution because you did a lot as Secretary General to strengthen it. The Spitzenkandidaten system perhaps would not exist or would not exist in this form. So I think you are very qualified to see how you experienced the solidity of national parliaments from your viewpoint.
Yes, thank you, Federico. After this very kind introduction, I think it can just be a disappointment, probably. Let's see. So, I'd like to say the following. It's impossible to make recommendations how to improve the system without understanding the system. So the first thing is we have to understand the institutional system we are in and the fact that every institutional system has to properly reflect the space it wants to organize. You want to organize France, you do it in a different way than you want to organize the European Union. And the space we have to organize consists of 27 states, a space of continental dimension from Madeira to the Black Sea, from northern Finland, which is pretty cold, to Cyprus, and of very different religion, history, culture, and experience of the people. And that's why this space has to be organized as a federal system, not a federal state. What does federal system mean? It means division of power among many actors on the federal level of the system, so the Commission, the Council, the Parliament, but also between the European Union level, the national level, and the regional level. And when you divide that power on the federal level of the system, so the European Union level in Brussels, you have to respect the 2 sources of legitimacy which are equal. If you look into the treaty, you see that there are 2 sources of legitimacy. One is the states that have established the European Union, and the other one are the citizens. And only when both are coming together, a decision is taken. And that's why we have a Council of Ministers, and that's why we have a European Parliament, and normally only when these two are agreeing, a decision is taken. But in our case, that leads to a major anomaly. Because in the Council of Ministers, we have governments that legislate. For us who are in the system, it doesn't look strange. But if we compare to any other system, democratic system in the world, it should look very strange. Maybe with the exception of the German Bundesrat, where you also have Länder that legislate, but they at least legislate in plenary session. You have a plenary session of the Bundesrat. You don't have a plenary session of the Council of Ministers. And that creates a major issue, which means that if we are in this situation, then the control of governments by national parliaments becomes essential. Because if we have executives that are legislating, at least they should be properly controlled by their national parliaments. And here we face the second problem, because the European Union is running on division of power. So many different actors who are in permanent negotiation and who somehow have to come to an agreement, but they don't represent the same political majority. In fact, in the Council, the majorities change all the time with different elections in the member states. On the national level, the normal system is fusion of power, because you have a parliamentary majority that creates a government, and once that parliamentary majority doesn't want to support anymore, the government has to resign, there are new elections, and that fusion of power is re-established with a new majority. The problem with that is that if you have to execute your control function against yourself, because it's the same political majority, normally that control function might be relatively weak. Especially because the strongest representatives of that party that's forming that majority normally find their way into government. So that's the starting position from my point of view for our debate and also for the problems we face in the control of the Council and the governments once they are legislating on the European level. Under those conditions, you have the best chance to control if you are in a system of minority government, because in that system, the government is relatively weak. And that's why a lot of the innovative approaches in the European Union have been coming from Denmark, because Denmark, until very recently, had a history of decades of minority government. So there, a parliament is strong because that minority government needs to look for support all the time, otherwise it is collapsing. So Denmark, going to Denmark, which by the way also exists in development policy, and some believe going to Denmark would also be good on immigration, but that's a different story. So Denmark has been serving as a kind of reference point. And we also see Finland, because how did Parliament address this issue of strengths between Parliament and government? By putting the strongest, the key decision makers into one body, which is the Grand Committee. So like this, they could organize counterweight to the government, which otherwise is difficult. The Bundestag found another solution, which is, I mean, shouldn't use that expression, but it's a kind of administrative overkill, you know? We sent, I don't know whether the figure is correct, we sent 30 people to Brussels. I don't know whether it's 30 or 20 or 25, but let's say in that region. And that's also strengthening Parliament. So I think the work that you have been doing is extremely useful, because my experience during my time in the European Parliament was that national parliaments as a collective can only be strong if they take inspirations from other parliaments on how to effectively control government. So what you have been doing could form the basis of a kind of gold standard of parliaments, how they can effectively control their governments when they are legislating as executives in Brussels, which is an anomaly.
Okay, thank you very much, Klaus. There is a lot of substance now on the table, so I suggest that you can already start signaling to me if you would like to take the floor for questions or comments are also welcome. Many of you are directly involved in working in some of these processes, so I already see one person. We have, I think, 25 minutes to 30 minutes. So I will start with, I will give as much space as possible to you. And of course, I have questions of my own, but I think you should have precedence. Please.
Kurt Geisert, I'm one of the guys in the House of European History. I have a question for the lady. In the future, we will try to have less unanimity in the Council and more qualified majority. Are you optimistic that national parliaments will understand this?
As unanimous, I think you can, Christina, directly answer that.
Yes. Thanks for the question. In the future, yes, hopefully, as things stand, we are blocked with the treaties, although there are the passerelle clauses, and in that regard, national parliaments could certainly also exploit another power that they were given by the Lisbon Treaty, and most of them, if not all of them, have adapted also the legislation to that respect, to also vetoing or instead giving the green light to the option of moving from unanimity to qualified majority. It's difficult to say in which way they will go, but it depends a bit on the subject matter, whether we will see that related more to security issues. We may have a front that is less inclined to concede on this point, or whether it is more on economic policy coordination. That can be other actors preventing the shift from unanimity to qualified majority.
Thank you. Actually, this gives me the chance to ask a question myself, this issue of less unanimity in the European Council. On the European Council, I have the feeling that there are two conflicting, I wouldn't call them democratic theories, but approaches to the European Council. The mainstream one, at least in Eurobubble circle, is the one that you have described, right? That the European Council has become the main blind spot of EU democracy, and we need to find ways to better legitimize it. If you have the notion of the EU as a federal system or a quasi-federal system, that makes sense. But there is a counter-narrative which comes especially from the right, more sovereignist right, which the European Council is the ultimate embodiment of legitimacy because it is intergovernmental, because it works mostly by consensus and unanimity. So actually, we should empower. The empowerment of the European Council is a good news from that point of view. So maybe I would ask Klaus and Nicola to offer their perspective. Is the European Council the blind spot of EU democracy or a resource of EU democracy? And what are the ways to hold it accountable in a better way, either at the European level or at the national level? Klaus.
Yeah, thank you. My comments were mainly directed towards the Council of Ministers as a legislative body, because European Council is not, at least it shouldn't be. My view on the European Council is not negative. I think the European Council is sitting in the system where in the system you would have normally the president. Of course, we have very different presidents. We have the French president who thinks he should decide everything in normal times. And we have the German president who is entitled to give speeches on Sundays. If we are generous, even on Mondays, but more or less. And so it's somewhere there. Of course, they believe they should be collectively the French president, but they are not. It's somewhere in the middle. I think that they have a very important function, which I've been calling the elevator function. in moments of crisis, they can they can elevate legitimacy from the national level to the European level, like during the financial crisis. There needed to be somebody who had the authority to say, okay, as of Monday, we are starting to work on the ESM. And that was only the European Council. So it's a bit, in Germany there was this expression, die List der Geschichte. It's not the joke of history, but die List der Geschichte, that the European Council is placed there, but its essential function might be to elevate responsibility from the national to the European level in moments of crisis.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I agree that the European Council is playing a key role, and I like the term political direction, which is indirizzo politico in Italian, which is a function, and also in constitutional theory is very highlighted. But from the perspective of the democratic responsibility and accountability, indeed, there is a problem there. Because it's true that we can do, and much has been done at national level, and we quote the Italian and the Spanish cases in which the prime minister comes either before or afterwards the meetings. And so let's say that nationally speaking, how leaders deal and protect national interest, national parliaments can do much. But there is a clear lack of collective political responsibility. There is no place in which the European Council members should be called into question, into account, to verify whether they have satisfactorily fulfilled the general interest of the Union. And as the European Council is dealing with the general interest of the Union, not just the Commission, but also the European Council is dealing and elevating, as Klaus Welle was just saying, we need some kind of collective political responsibility enforced there. Something can be done through interparliamentary cooperation, but has not been done. It's not that much, but at least it might be something.
Could you specify what exactly you have in mind?
I can quote maybe the interparliamentary conference established by the Fiscal Compact on economic governance. That has been, I think, the most clear example of failed attempt to deal with political direction of the Union at interparliamentary cooperation level. And do the opposite of what has been done in that conference, let's say, and take some elements from the Europol scrutiny group, maybe it can be.
Okay. I have two more questions from the floor. The gentleman over there and the lady over there, please.
Thank you. My name is Jakob Sjöwall. I'm the current permanent member of the COSAC Secretariat and previous Swedish representative for the Swedish Parliament here in Brussels. This is, of course, very interesting reading for someone like me and colleagues. I will limit myself to a question on the if you could develop a bit, because one of the things that I found interesting was the example on interparliamentary cooperation on the JPSG for Europol. You highlight that as a good example of how interparliamentary cooperation could be developed. That's an interesting case, and I would like to hear more of your thoughts on that, because in a certain way you could say that the JPSG is an outlier in the sense that I remember, for example, when it was started and we had discussions in the Swedish Parliament, we were wondering if it's even an interparliamentary conference at all, because it's so different and kind of different by design. It has a different aim than, say, for example, COSAC. And Olivier, you said COSAC is vague, let's say, or and maybe that is, that's a feature, not a bug, in a certain sense. But I was curious to hear your reflections on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. The lady here.
My name is Amy Propel. I'm an interloper from the University of Florida, but I'm here to help Olivier as a political scientist. I have two connected questions. I want to emphasize what was said about understanding the role of the national executive within the legislative branch of the EU by conceptualizing the EU as a federal political system. You don't need to think of it as a state to think of it as a federal political system, and it's not just Germany, it's the US before direct election of the Senate that had a similar system. I think, as was mentioned a little bit, is the lack of plenary, but the lack of plenary is based on co-repair. And I didn't really hear anybody discuss the democratic problems of co-repair, which is perhaps the least transparent entity within the EU, who makes effectively many of the decisions a priori without effective oversight. And that is, in a way, linked to the question about QMV in the Council of the EU, because you can hold your ministers to account in the national parliament, but if there is QMV in the Council, they might have voted the way you wanted. So the national parliament still doesn't have an effective voice at the EU level if their member state can be outvoted within the Council.
Okay, thank you very much. There is a third intervention.
Thank you very much. My name is Andrea Laskava, and I work in the European Parliament, Director General for Parliamentary Partnerships, and I'm here with my Director for the relations with the National Parliament, Jesus, and my colleague Manuel, and many other colleagues, Hannah here, that I would like to greet. I very much like 6 ways how to better involve national parliaments as a title. I noted very well 9 recommendations how to improve it. And I remember from one inspirational speaker that very often forms his thesis number 10. So allow me to add one suggestion how to better involve the national parliaments. And this is a little bit linked with my previous professional experience. I worked for a political group, and their way of involvement in national parliaments is also the political family meetings gatherings. So maybe this is also a way that you could explore. The institutional framework that we have offers this possibility. We have COSAC's meetings, we have the parliamentary committee meetings, and we offer the possibility for the parliamentarians to meet across their political families. And this is, for me, I find it very important European dimension that they come to Brussels, and they wouldn't go necessarily only to meet their national counterparts, but they would have this possibility to interact even more. So it's an additional platform that they have, additional platform how to exchange best practices, what we are talking about. So just a little remark and maybe a suggestion for further exploratory work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Question perhaps on interparliamentary cooperation and COSAC. I suspect you might be well placed, Olivier, to end also.
Christina and I guess.
Oh, okay, so you two can maybe intervene. Maybe Christina, you want to start?
Thanks very much for this question. And indeed, the JPSG on Europol is somehow an outlier because it's scrutinizing an agency with a particular mandate. And so in the report on this particular form of interparliamentary cooperation, there is also a word of caution on the possibility to extend this model well beyond these or other agencies. Already Eurojust has a different style of interparliamentary involvement, as we know. In my view, I would not criticize too much instances of permanent cooperation like COSAC and the Speaker Conference, for example, because there's a high level of coordination also on the selection of the topics, key issues, programming activities that then can inform also the individual scrutiny of national parliaments, the scrutiny of the European Parliament. I'm more critical of the sectoral interparliamentary conferences which have been established also after long negotiations on the rules of procedure, because they have a very general mandate and too broad. Probably they should be split into working groups, sectoral committees inside this plethoric session. But I still think there is a huge value, and it's also acknowledged by the treaties, by the way, by the protocols, in having COSAC as a sort of instance of coordination for interparliamentary cooperation, where the European Parliament has a specific role. And so I think there is a value. But then we should be more focused, maybe also having more instances, or not necessarily permanent, for scrutinizing specific sub-policy areas. I don't know if I'm clear in my answer, but thanks very much.
Yeah, Olivier, I mean, you can address this, but any other issue?
Yes, thank you. On parliamentary cooperation, I want to stress something, which is that there is a practical dimension to it that you know a lot, because I guess you have to organize the meetings sometimes. And the European Parliament still has an advantage regarding the practicalities of interparliamentary cooperation. By this I mean having a big room for meeting in Brussels, Strasbourg, and Luxembourg, and having translators, having a sufficient number of clerks to prepare it, etc. And of course, it enabled the European Parliament, and especially my neighbor, to frame, in a way, interparliamentary cooperation for some years, with openness, because we are all in favor of more parliamentary democracy, but also with a willingness not to have too much competition on the sides of national parliaments for the European Parliament. Now, I will not develop, but I think you see my point. And this is changing. This is changing thanks to digitalization, so the greater possibility to have remote online meeting, and thanks to automatic translation, which is gaining ground. And I think it will change a lot in the future. It has already started on the possibility to have more fluid relation from standing committees to standing committees of national parliaments, and of course of the European Parliament, because it's not about putting it aside, but it's changing with the possibility to have a more to stand more on an equal foot between national parliaments and the European Parliament. And yes, that was my first point. On Amy's point regarding COREPER, the problem with COREPER is often the lack of involvement of ministers vis-à-vis their senior civil servants from their capital. And well, that's one of the reasons for the involvement of national parliaments. Not especially to influence them or to control them, etc., but to force them to work and to investigate what their ambassadors are deciding. And well, we have some empirical works regarding, for instance, parliamentary questions, showing that it works when the question time in national parliament is tough, when you can be asked tough questions. Well, you have a strong incentive as a minister to prepare it and to be really sure of the position that will be taken by your clerks. Regarding QMV, qualified majority voting, I don't see this as a problem for national parliaments. First, because I'm pro-European, and and we know that it's a condition for European integration, so it's important to believe in it. Second, because the view that it is a problem implicitly says that national parliaments should first and foremost influence the position of their national government, whereas there is a larger diversity of functions, as we said in the introduction, and which is also to create debate, to force the opposition, the majority to commit, to take stance vis-à-vis the voters, etc. And this can be done with QMV. And second, because we know that the spirit in Brussels is still, and it has resisted, a consensual mood, when trying to find majority within the Council, between the European Parliament and the Council. It's still not a majoritarian, but there is still this willingness to have very large majorities. So the QMV, as we know, does not mean that we have a very tiny majority, but we have a strong incentive to push for a compromise. And national parliaments still can have a role to play in that sense.
Thank you, Klaus. On maybe on everything that you want to comment, but particularly Coreper and qualified majority voting, maybe?
Yeah, I was tempted also because Andrea suggested a 10th point. I was also tempted to propose a 10th point. I think the overall debate has to be situated in the overall necessities of the system to develop. And I think we are so much under pressure from all sides that to increase the capacity to take decisions should be an overarching aim. And we have the differentiation between the Treaty on the European Union and on the functioning of the Union. We have two treaties. I'm not a lawyer, but I hope that I understood this correctly. So, which makes the difference between the fundamentals and then those, in the functioning of the European Union, which goes more into the details. I could very well imagine, and I remember I made this proposal at the time to Giscard d'Estaing, just in a bilateral meeting where President Pöttering allowed me to intervene. I could imagine that for the Treaty on the functioning of the European Union, we facilitate changes by allowing this to be done by a Congress consisting of all members of the European Parliament and the equal number of members of national parliament.
Okay, thanks, Klaus. We have Nicola, who still didn't get the chance to comment.
I don't want to add that much. Maybe just I agree with the suggestion, the 10th suggestion on political family meetings, gatherings to be added to interparliamentary cooperation to give substance to them. And maybe a small point of dissent, if I may, with Klaus' views, but it's just to, it's not unknown to the two of us, but indeed, I'm rather convinced that the fact that the governments legislate within the Council is not an anomaly, provided that they have a link to their own parliament and parliamentary majorities. So, up to a certain extent, for me, the Danish case, but it's a personal view. I don't think it's shared by the three of us. We have, of course, an internal dynamic in order to reach this report. It's not was not so easy to reach some shared views. But in any case, in my view, the Danish case is the outlier up to a certain extent. Why the normal case is where the decision taken by the national governments within the Council and within the Coreper are fully consistent with what the national majorities and the national government and as executive and ministries think of that certain policy. But okay, that's just to to bring it.
Okay, I don't see further questions from the fund, but I do see now. So please.
I'm Eftimio. I'm a former official of the European Parliament. And as our Secretary General knows very well, the European Parliament has long ago started trying to involve the national parliaments in all sorts of forms, starting from the Intergovernmental Conference many years ago, and going to the COSAC, going to the creation of the section of the relations with the national parliaments. I have to say the results were not as expected. This dream of the European Parliament has not really come to fruition. It was a dream, and we did a lot of things, many steps towards this dream, but it needs a bit more to be more effective. And it's very good that we involved the sectorial committees and the political groups. And there was a time when the committees of the European Parliament would meet in national member states, and they would meet with their equivalent members of national parliaments. And then there were also delegations of smaller number of committee members that would go to member states and also meet with their national counterparts. But what was missing was first the problems with the council, because I remember a French member, French national parliamentarian, was putting this very clearly. He said that they asked the Minister of Agriculture in the French Parliament about a certain decision that was taken in Brussels. And he said, I don't know, I voted against it, but in Brussels they decided so. And this alibi of Brussels is used too much because we do not have the information, the transparency on the decision making of the council. We don't know who voted what and why. And that is a problem for the national parliaments. And also another thing also is that not all member states are interested on the same topics that the European Union is legislating. And I quite agree with the point 9 that it should be, our relation should be focused. We should have a certain.
I'm sorry to just,
yeah.
If you can come to a conclusion.
Yeah, and also another point is that the legislation that the Union puts forward needs to be a bit more simplified for the national parliaments.
But this gives me the chance to ask maybe all of you a final question, and then we prepare for lunch, which is how should we conceptualize and understand the relationship between national parliaments and the European Parliament at this stage? Is it a complementary relationship? Is it sufficiently institutionalized? Are there competitive also dynamics in it that we need to keep into account? Give us, as a final remark, because we are going towards the end, your view of how concretely should we understand and institutionalize this Euro-national parliamentary system in its relationship with the EU and the national level. And I maybe suggest that I start from Klaus and then I follow the order of sitting.
Okay, I can be short. I think it's complementary. That's also why nobody has been doing so much for this coordination and cooperation than the European Parliament from all kinds of aspects. And we have seen that when we had intergovernmental conferences, at the end of the day, the divergence was not between national parliaments and European parliaments. It was more between them and executives.
Thank you. Olivier?
Yes, 2 points on this question. First, in terms of influence, it has clearly shifted. The perception of each has clearly shifted over the last year. Let me take the recent example of the ratification of the Turnberry agreement, the trade agreement between the EU and the US. The European Parliament played a key role, really a key role for a question which is central for our future and our economy, and it really shows the great influence taken by the EP. This being said, I have a second answer in terms of political sociology of elites, so the careers. And what's striking is that the EU is different from the US in that perspective. In the US, clearly the best politicians go to Washington after a while. The aim is to enter the Congress. In the EP, it's different. In the EU, so it's different. Not that we have the worst politician in the EP, that's not my point, but we have parallel career with some politicians who specialized in EU affairs and spent 15 years in Brussels and Strasbourg, and others who specialize within national parliament, especially in major member states. And, well, possibly that's a democratic issue and it's not the best democratic solution.
Olivier, Nicola?
I also think the relationship are complementary, although we might notice a variation. There's been a moment in which national parliament felt very strong and the European Parliament needed to become more robust, so was a bit more reluctant maybe to open the floor to national parliaments. I think nowadays the situation is that the European Parliament is so strong that it can be very open towards national parliaments, and I think it's more important to work a bit, and we have not talked much, but in the report there are some hints on this, on parliamentary administrations. In order to be part of the process, national parliamentarians need a lot of assistance, technical assistance. That's why the people from the Bundestag working permanently in Brussels. And if in these regards, I think the European Parliament might further increase the relationship, and even more, national parliaments should exchange people between themselves. That's really a very low degree of interchange of administrators between national parliaments, and on this there should be easy to improve, I think.
Thank you, Christina.
Very quickly, I think the relationship should be definitely complementary and should be seen as such. It's true, in my view, that national parliaments have not fully understood the potential of becoming allies with European Parliament. We had the experience of the conventions, but also with the CETA agreement, TTIP, maybe Olivier was making reference to that. European Parliament provided national parliament that had no access whatsoever to information to gain some ideas of what was going on, and typically considering the mixity of that agreement. So I think it would be for national parliament to further exploit this partnership. And it's clear, in my view, as a scholar, that the European Parliament has done a lot from, decades, allowing members of national parliament to participate in the European Parliament's activity, and this should be done more and more. I think, going back to the point that was raised before, the key issue is to make European political families the trade union between these national and European parliamentary dimension more. I think the system is improving in that respect. We see the European political families more active, maybe also thanks to the experience of the Spitzenkandidat and also in the European parliamentary campaign, but this should remain more stable during the parliamentary term to create this nexus that we desperately need, in my view.
Indeed, this is a fitting conclusion because, after all, we are political foundations affiliated with European political parties, and a lot of what we do is a way to Europeanize national political cultures and precisely strengthen that link between, maybe indeed the key is European political parties. Stronger European political parties are, we have a section on European political parties in our 70s, but clearly they also enter into this dimension of strengthening the parliamentary relationship between the European level and the national level. There are 6 and more ways, many more, that we have not been able to consider, but we need to start, having the habit of thinking about legitimacy and democratic questions as within an integrated system. There is no such thing as EU democracy and national democracy. Of course, there are separate compartments, but there are constant interactions in terms of legitimation between the two levels. And we need to develop the habit of thinking in those terms. Even us in the Brussels bubble, I think, don't have it yet. So the study can contribute to doing that. So feel free to take it and read it. And there will be lunch in a few minutes. So just have patience for a few minutes as the lunch is set up. Thank you very much. Let's give our speakers a round of applause. Io adesso sono in parte.